Okay, welcome back again to our video discussion, and we are now in our lesson 6. And lesson 6 is all about global interstate system. So, to start our video discussion, let me share to you our lesson objectives. So, lesson objectives. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to distinguish attributes of today's global system. Differentiate state and nation, trace the origins of the global interstate system, and explain the effects of globalization to the international relation and global governance. So, proceed to our discussion. Let us go to the next slide. For the introductory statement, the world is composed of many countries or states, all of them having different form of governments. Some scholars or politics are interested in individual states and examine the internal politics of these countries. So, in this discussion or in this topic, we all know that our world is composed of different countries around the world, and all of them having different form of governments, different system, different cultures, different nation, different lifestyles. And to clearly understand globalization, we need to examine the internal politics of these countries in order to establish an international relations. So internationalization does not equal to globalization, although it's a major part of globalization. And we also explained that during our lesson 1 that it encompasses a multitude of connections and interaction that cannot be reduced to the ties between governments. Nevertheless, it is important to study the international relations as a facet of globalization because state or government are key drivers of global processes. So, we need to study international relations or interstate systems because these countries, these states, are the key drivers of global process. Without these countries, without these nations, without these states, globalization is not there, or it becomes useless because ang key drivers ng globalization is ang mga bansa or ang mga bansa sa buong mundo. So, today in this topic, we're going to discuss the attributes of today's global system. Ano bang klase ng bansa meron sa buong mundo ngayon? Ano na yung mga system of government nila, system of economy, or ano ba yung paraan para magkaroon ng iba't ibang relationship ang mga bansa sa buong mundo. So first, world politics today has 4 key attributes. First, there are countries or states that are independent and govern themselves. From the word itself, there are countries that can govern themselves without the intervention of, or without relationship with other countries. Second, these countries interact with each other through diplomacy. So these countries, or the independent countries around the world, nakikipagkalakalan sila or komunikasyon or may mga relasyon sila sa iba't ibang bansa sa pamamagitan ng diplomacy. When we say diplomacy, is negotiation, it's agreement, it's a peacekeeping, peace offering, parang ganon. Yan yung diplomacy. Third, there are international organizations like the United Nations that facilitate interaction. So, may mga international organizations na nagpa-facilitate ng international relations ng iba't ibang countries sa bansa. Sila yung nagpa-facilitate kung how a certain country behave towards another country. And number 4, beyond simply facilitating meeting between states, international organizations also take on their lives of their own. And ibig sabihin, there are lots of international organization and they also have their tasks and responsibilities on their own. And to clearly understand the international relations or the origins of interstate system, we are urged to ask a question, what are the origins of this system? Paano ba nagsimula yung ganitong sistema? So, a good start is by unpacking what means when she say a country or what academics call the nation state. So, ano bang pagkakaiba ng mga terms na yan? Let's find out. The nation-state is composed of two non-interchangeable terms. The two non-interchangeable terms are not all states are nation and not all nations are states. Ibig sabihin, hindi lahat ng nation or hindi lahat ng states ay nation and hindi lahat ng nations are states. Let's say for example, the nation of Scotland. Scotland is a nation from Europe, specifically under the state of United Kingdom. The Scotland has its own flag and national culture, but still belong to a state called the United Kingdom. So, ibig sabihin, Scotland is a independent nation, but it is not a state because he, he lacks different components of states. It just have its own flag and national culture. But still, even though they urge to have a autonomous or an autonomy nation, they still belong to the state called the United Kingdom. And bringing closer to home, pwede natin gawing example yung dito sa Pilipinas, yung Bangsamoro region. Bangsamoro region is a region in the southern part of the Philippines, specifically in Mindanao, who urged to have an autonomous region. Hiwalay nila yung sarili nila sa Pilipinas. But then again, a nation cannot consider as a state because you have to encompass all the requirements to become a state. And until now, even though they have their own culture, their own flag, their own system of government, they still recognize the authority of the Philippines over them. Meanwhile, if there are states with multiple nations, there are also single nation with multiple states. So, what are the examples of this? The nation of Korea is divided into North and South Korea, whereas the Chinese nation may refer to both People's Republic of China or the mainland China and the Taiwan. So to clearly explain that, we can see that Koreans are same nation. The South and North Korea are same nation. Parehas sila ng nation, parehas sila ng kultura, but they are different system of government. And they are both an independent state. So, ibig sabihin, single yung nation nila, but they have multiple states. Dalawa yung state nila kasi magkaibang country ang North at South Korea, but they are in the same nation. So, they have single nation but with multiple states. The same thing with the Chinese. The Chinese nation may refer to both People's Republic of China, which is the mainland China, and Taiwan. We can see that China and Taiwan is a separate country. They are considered independent states. So, in this case, they are a single nation but they have multiple states. Ganyan po kagulo yung nation state. Ganyan po dapat iniintindi yung pagkakaiba ng nation state. So, to clearly understand the differences between nation and state, let us found out in the next slide. Okay, difference between state and nation. So, state. In layman's term, state refer to a country and its government. Example, the government of the Philippines. And a state has 4 attributes. Unang-una, dapat sa isang state, sa isang country, merong citizens. Para dun mo i-exercise yung authority mo. Dapat meron ka rin sariling territory kung saan yung mga laws and policies mo dun, gagana hanggang sa teritoryong yon. While you should have also a system of government. And lastly, you should have a sovereignty, both internal and external sovereignty. So, in this case, let us assess Philippines if Philippines is fast to become or to be considered as a state. Philippines has citizens, yes. It has territory. It has government and it has sovereignty under internal external aspects. So, in that sense, state, para maging state ka, kailangan meron kang citizens, kailangan meron kang territory, kailangan meron kang government, dapat meron ka rin sovereignty. Hindi ka magiging state kung may kultura ka lang, kung may national flag ka lang, but instead, unless meron kang citizens, territory, government, and sovereignty, you are considered as a state. Yan. So I hope state is clear to you now. Okay, when we say nation, on the other hand, the nation according to Benedict Anderson is an imagined community. It is limited because it does not go beyond a given official boundary and because right and responsibility are mainly the privilege and concern of the citizen of the nation. So, when we say nation, it's a complex word. It encompasses a lot of definition. But to simplify this definition, we can say that a nation is limited not in the sense that it has boundaries or it has limitations, but it is limited to the fact that for you to belong to a specific nation, you should have a particular culture, a same spoken language, and you should live together in a specific territory. Yun ang ibig sabihin, kaya sinabi siyang limited. Hindi dahil may mga limitations or boundaries, but it has a specific aspects for you to determine para masabi mong kabilang ka sa isang nasyon. O masasayang kabilang ka sa isang nation kung you have a particular culture, same particular culture, you speak the same language, and you live in the same territory. And sabi din dito, nation is imagined community. Why imagine? Imagine meaning hindi siya yung gawa-gawa lang. Imagine siya to the point that it allows you to feel that you are part of a certain community. For example, you are watching Olympics and you nakakita ka na may Filipino na sumali sa Olympics. And you cheer for her or you cheer for him, knowing the fact that hindi mo naman siya kilala and never kayo nag-meet in your entire lifetime, but it allows yourself to feel that you are both belong to a same community wherein nag-cheer mo pa siya, pinagsigawan mo sana manalo siya. So, in that sense, it is imagined even though hindi mo siya nakakasama personally, but having the same feeling of you are belong to the same community, that makes a nation. Kaya sinabi siyang imagine. So, makikita natin yung definition ng nation as an imagined and a limited because it does not go beyond a given official boundary. Like I've said before, hindi siya ang nation ay hindi gawa-gawa lang, at ang nation wala siyang boundary of limitations, but may sinusod lang siyang mga aspects. And for example, nagbigay nga ako ng example yung sa Olympics, na kahit hindi mo siya kilala, cheer mo siya, knowing that you are in the same or in a same community wherein you are both part of the same community. So, yan po yung pagkakaiba ng nation at ng state. Malaki po yung pagkakaiba nila kasi pag sinabing nation, maraming pwedeng ibig sabihin ng nation, like the Filipino nation. Nakaka-imagine ka na meron kayong connections as both members of the same Filipino community as an example. So, I hope you clearly understand what is the differences between nation and state. So much for that. Let us see the importance of nation or the importance of nation state. Nation and state are closely related because it is nationalism that facilitates the formation of the state. In the modern and contemporary era, it has been a nationalist movement that have allowed for the creation of nation-state. State become independent and sovereign because of the nationalist sentiment that clamors for this independence. Ibig sabihin, state cannot be produced or cannot be created without nation. without nationalism because, for example, before, our country is not fully known as an independent country or independent state. But through the collective effort of our heroes and our villains and other yung mga bayani, we're able to make our country an independent one. At bakit? Paano nila ginawa yon? Through nationalism. Sa pagpapakita ng love for country, yung pagiging patriotic nila, yung pagpapakita nila ng nationalism, nakabuo or naka-create tayo ng isang independent country. And thanks for the efforts of our national heroes for them to create an independent country or the state for us, and we are benefited very much during our time. So, napakahalaga ng nation and state to each other because without state, without nation, there is no state. So, you have to take note of that, the importance of nation and state to each other. So much for that. So, to clearly deepen our understanding on the global interstate system, let us now discuss the origin of global state system. So, like I said before, our course is contemporary world, but to fully understand what is happening in a contemporary era, we should also go back to the historical backgrounds of it, because without studying the past events, we are not fully aware of what happening in the present. So we have to really understand what happened before for able us to understand what happened today. So it's part of contemporary world. So the origin of global intersystem was started before, when all of the nations are in chaos or are in wars, disputes, ang daming kaguluhan during that time. Lahat ng bagay pinag-aawayan, even religions. And during that time, dyan nagkakaroon ng mga battles between different beliefs, different principles. And during that time din, walang pagkakaisa mga bansa. Lagi silang nag-aaway. Pero, dumating naman sa point na nagkaroon ng established proper relationship ang mga bansa around the world through a process of time. So, to clearly understand that, let us start the origin of global system. So, the origin of global interstate system was started during the Treaty of Westphalia. So, what is the Treaty of Westphalia? The origin of the present-day concept of sovereignty can be traced back to the Treaty of Westphalia, which was set of agreement signed in 1648 to end the 30 years wars between major continental powers of Europe. So, imagine that, 30 years of war. Yung isang taon o ilang buwan nga lang ng war, nakakapagod na eh. Imagine that, 30 years of war. So, para sa mga bansa na napagod din sila, they have to make a treaty or a kasunduan para magtapos yung mga wars na pinaggagawa nila. And yung wars dyan before is all about a brutal religious war between Catholics and Protestant. These two is pinaglalaban nila yung kanilang mga paniniwala about Catholicism and Protestantism. So, in the Treaty of Westphalia, yung mga bansang nag-sign dyan is the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, France, Sweden, and the Dutch Republic. That for them, this treaty will recognize that the treaty signer exercise complete controls over their domestic affairs and swear not to meddle in each other's affairs. So, in that sense, makikita natin na meron ng international relationship between each countries around the world. Kahit yung palang ay Spain, Holy Roman Empire, France, Sweden. Kasi mag-grow and through the process of time. So, next, after this Treaty of Westphalia, na-trigger ito naman ng pagdating ng French Revolution. Sino nagpasimula ng French Revolution? So, yan ay si Napoleon Bonaparte. So, the Westphalian system provide the stability for the nation of Europe until it faced its major challenge by Napoleon Bonaparte, which is the Napoleon French Revolution is believed in spreading the principles of French Revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity to the rest of Europe, and thus challenged the power of the kings, nobilities, and religion in Europe. So, dumating itong si Napoleon Bonaparte to spread his beliefs of liberty, equality, fraternity para ma-challenge yung power ng mga kings, nobility, and religious group in Europe. So, bakit kaya? Bakit kaya ganun yung atake ni Napoleon Bonaparte? So, let's find out. In every country that they conquered, the French implemented the Napoleonic Code that forbade birth privilege, encouraged freedom of religion, and promoted meritocracy on the government service. So, yan yung mga reasons ni Napoleon Bonaparte kung bakit niya in-spread yung Napoleonic Code dun sa country na sasakop nila. And yung ginawa ni Napoleon Bonaparte, naging warning doon sa mga monarchs and other hereditary elites. Kasi parang feeling nila, dahil doon sa mga pinagagawa ni Napoleon Bonaparte, pwedeng matapos yung political dynasties within their families. So, inutusan na yung mga armies nila na labanan ng si Napoleon Bonaparte until matalo nila. So, after matalo ni Napoleon Bonaparte, nagkaroon ng bagong unions or international unions between different countries in Europe, and what we call Concert of Europe. So paano nagsimula ang Concert of Europe? So during that time, the Anglo and Prussian armies finally defeated Napoleon in the Battle of Waterloo in 1850, and ending the latter's mission to spread the liberal cause across the Europe. So to prevent another war and keep their system privileged, the royal powers created a new system that in effect restored the Westphalian system. And another name for Westphalian system is the Concert of Europe. So what is the Concert of Europe? Concert of Europe was an alliance of great powers, the United Kingdom, Austria, Prussia, and Russia. So more importantly, it was an alliance that sought to restore the sovereignty of the state. So they create this union to restore yung or para ibalik muli doon sa mga nasakop ni Napoleon Bonaparte yung kalayaan or yung sovereignty over their states. Under the Metternich system, named after the Austrian diplomat Clemens von Metternich, who was the system's main architect, the concert powers and authority lasted from 1815 to 1914 at the dawn of World War I. So, bakit hindi rin tumagal ang Concert Europe? Kasi, itong mga bansang to, kung sino man ang gumawa niya ng alliance na sila din yung involved sa World War I. So, the Concert of Europe not lasted until the World War I. So, after the World War I, or after the Concert of Europe, nagkaroon naman tayo ng tinatawag nating, or so, under the Concert of Europe, dyan na nangyari yung nagsimula na yung pagkakaroon ng internationalization or internationalism. Internationalism is composed of two types. So, let's first understand the concept of internationalism. The word Westphalian and concert system divided the world into separate sovereign entities. Since the existence of this interstate system, there have been attempts to transcend it. Still, others imagine a system of heightened interaction between various sovereign states, particularly the desire for a greater cooperation and unity among state and people. This desire is called internationalism. So, ibig sabihin, ang internationalism is yung interaction between various sovereign state, and it is for desire for greater cooperation and unity among state and people. From its definition itself, makikita natin ang internationalism wants to promote international relations between various countries, and to have a greater cooperation and unity among other nations. So, internationalism is composed of two types. That is the liberal internationalism and socialist internationalism. So, let us first define what is liberal internationalism. So, liberal internationalism, it is the first major thinker of liberal internationalism was the late 18th century German philosopher Immanuel Kant. Kant likened states in global system to people living a given territory. If people living together require a government to prevent lawlessness. Without a form of government, he argued that international system will be chaotic. In short, Kant imagined a form of global government. In short, since si Immanuel Kant ang first major thinker of liberal internationalism, he advocates that in order to have a more appealing and more systematic relations with each other or with other countries around the world, kailangan merong form of global government to prevent lawlessness para maiwasan yung dispute or disagreement between other nations or between other countries. So, para sa kanya, kung walang global government or a force like a global government, yung international system magiging chaotic or magiging magulo. So, another one, British philosopher Jeremy Bentham, who coined the word international, advocate the creation of international law that govern international or interstate relations. Kung kay Immanuel Kant, global governance ang gusto niya, dito naman kay Jeremy Bentham, ang gusto naman niya ay international law. Kasi having an international law will guarantee and will govern the interstate relations and having a better relationship with other countries around the world. So, the first thinker to reconcile nationalism is Giuseppe Mazzini. Kaya naman merong reconciliation ng liberal internationalism kasi maraming nag-oppose na mga government or other people sa liberal do sa mga pinopromote ina-advocate ni na Immanuel Kant and Jeremy Bentham na para sa kanila kailangan may global governance and merong international law. Sabi naman ng iba, kapag may nangyari daw na ganun, kung magkakaroon ng global governance and international law, magiging supreme itong body nito or itong institution nito over other countries and the worst, ma-overwhelm yung sovereignty ng mga individual states. Kaya naman, natakot itong iba't ibang bansa. But, Giuseppe Mazzini was able to reconcile nationalism with liberal internationalism. So, he believed in a republican government without kings and queens and hereditary successions and proposed a system of free nation that cooperated with each other to create international system. Ito namang itong si Mazzini, sinabihan niya yung mga iba't ibang nation o iba't ibang country na yung gagawing government is hindi yung government na may mga kings and queens na sila yung nasusunod, but it's the collective effort. Lahat ng countries meron ditong responsibilities, may part. At ang pinakang main goal nila is to cooperate with each other to create a good relation or international relation system. So, with the growth of liberal internationalists, nandiyan na yung nagkaroon na ng maraming unions, and one of the unions of international relations is the League of Nations. Well, itong si Mazzini, na-influence niya itong si Woodrow Wilson, a United States President during that time, who become one of the 20th century most prominent international. Like Mazzini, si Wilson, nakikita rin niya yung nationalism as a prerequisite for internationalism. Kasi nakikita niya, if nations if countries in around all over the world, if they cooperated to each other, magkakaroon talaga ng internationalism or magkakaroon ng international relations between other countries. And because of Woodrow's faith in nationalism, he able to forward the principle of their self-determination. It is the belief that the world's nation had a right in sovereign government. Ibig sabihin, itong government ng iba't ibang bansa it's their right, and they have a sovereignty over their territory, citizens, over their assets and natural resources. But unfortunately for um, Woodrow Wilson, the League of Nations came into being that same year. Ironically and unfortunately, Wilson and the United States was not able to join the organization due to the strong opposition from the Senate. So may mga pumipigil or may mga naghahadlang na maitayo yung makasali ang United States sa League of Nations. And another reason is that during that time, andyan na rin mangyayari yung World War II, na kung saan ang major countries na involved sa World War II is the United States and the Japan, or yan yung nangyaring bombing of Pearl Harbor and the incident in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. As we can say, para sa mga Senate, hindi na rin mangyari kasi nga itong League of Nations, imbis na magkaroon ng international relation, mas naging or nag-trigger pa ito para magkaroon pa ng isang pandaigdigan digmaan. So with that, they see League of Nations as a failure. But not totally a failure one, but it has its Waterloo, or it has its weaknesses. So despite its failure, the League of Nations gave birth to the sum of the more task-specific international organization that are still around today, and one of that is the World Health Organization and International Labor Organization. So with this, makita natin yung liberal internationalism is ought talaga to have a cooperation between different countries around the world, and to have a international or good relationship with each other. And one of that example is the League of Nations. So we are done in the liberal internationalism. Now we are going to go to the another type of internationalism, which is the socialist internationalism. So ano naman yung socialist internationalism? How it's differ from liberal internationalism? So despite no socialist internationalism is one of Mazzini's biggest critics was German socialist philosopher Karl Marx, who was also internationalist but who differed from the former because he did not believe in nationalism. He believed that any true form of internationalism should deliberately reject nationalism, which rooted people in domestic concerns instead of global ones. Ibig sabihin, nitong ni Karl Marx, yung socialist internationalism, it is more on sa mga practices or systems within your country rather in the global ones. Mas ano siya sa own country niya rather sa ibang country or international relations. Instead, Marx placed a premium on economic equality. He did not divide the world into countries but into classes. So, for him, ang mundo ay isang ekonomiya or isang industry or isang production wherein hindi niya hinati yung mundo sa pamamagitan ng bansa, but he divide the world into classes. The capitalist class referred to the owners of factories, companies, and other means of production. Sila yung mga mayamang bansa, yung mga may-ari ng productions. Well, in contrast, the proletariat class included those who did not own the means of production but instead work for the capitalists. Sila yung mga laborers or workers ng mga capitalists. Socialist International. So, under the Socialist Internationalism, one of the unions or institution that was established is the Socialist International. So, ano yung Socialist International? Marx died in 1893, but his followers soon sought to make his vision concrete by establishing the international organization, which is the Socialist International. This Socialist International was a union of European socialist and labor parties in the Paris. So, siya ay union or samahan ng mga Socialist International of European. Although short-lived lang yung Socialist International, meron din siya mga achievement na nakuha. Kasama na dyan yung May 1 as the Labor Day and International Women's Day. And also, the importance of initiated the successful campaign for 8-hour work for day. So, after the Socialist International, nagkaroon naman ng Union of Soviet Social Republics. So, itong Union of Socialist Republics, na nag-collapse ang Socialist International, nagkaroon ng more radical version. In the so-called Russian Revolution of 1917, Tsar Nicholas was overthrown and replaced by a revolutionary government led by the Bolshevik Party and its leader, Vladimir Lenin. So, mga taga-Russia naman yan. Sila yung nagpasimula ng Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. The new state was called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic or the USSR. So, anong meron dito sa USSR? Unlike the majority of the members of the Socialist International, the Bolshevik did not believe in obtaining power from the working class through elections. So rather, they exhorted the revolutionary vanguard parties to lead the revolution across the world using methods of terror if necessary. Today, parties like this is referred to as Communist Party. So, from the word communist, sino ba mga komunistang bansa dito? The Communist Party or Communist country is the China, North Korea, the Russia. Sila yung mga communist country. And for them, sa kanilang bansa, dalawa lang yung social class. The owner of the production and the workers in the productions. And for them, para sa kanila, kailanman hindi mag-gain ng power itong mga nasa working class because they are just workers. Rather, they exhorted a revolutionary vanguard that in this method, they use terror if necessary para takutin yung mga bansang kanilang workers. At we can see naman, itong mga bansang to talaga nakakatakot lalo na pagkakalabanin mo sila sa gera. Hindi ka talaga mananalo kasi you have to consider first kung gaano ka ba kahanda. Kasi isang click lang yan, isang tawag lang yan. Pwede na yung magpalabas ng nuclear bomb, pasabugin yung bansa ninyo. So, ganon. They use terror para hindi sila ma-overwhelm o ma-overthrow ng mga working class. So, after the Union of Soviet Republic, nagkaroon din ng Communist International. So, Communist International is dito ini-encourage na magkaroon ng mas maraming communist country. Kaya tinawag siyang Communist International. So, ito tinawag din natin Comintern. The Comintern served as the central body for the redirecting Communist Party all over the world. And in this institution or in this union is sila ay not only more radical but they're also less democratic because it's followed closely top-down governance of Bolsheviks. Ibig sabihin, yung mga countries na referred as a communist international or communist country, they are radical and less democratic. Kasi yung kanilang system of government is top-down lang. Pag nasa taas ka, you have a privilege, but pag nasa baba ka, you don't have the privilege. So, top-down lang yung governance nila. So, after the Communist International, nagkaroon naman ng Communist Information Bureau. This institution or union is the establishment of Comintern. Tinawag naman siyang Cominform, the Communist Information Bureau. The Soviet Union took over the countries in the Eastern Europe when the United States, the Soviet Union, and the Great Britain divided the war-torn Europe in the respective sphere of influence. So, the United States, the Soviet Union, and Great Britain, sinakop nila yung buong Europe, dinivide nila sa kanila para impluwensyahan nila during that time. And the Cominform, like the Comintern before, helped direct the various communist parties that had taken power in Eastern Europe. So, after this Communist Information Bureau. Marami pang mga sumunod na unions, but these are the most significant parties or organizations that you can distinguish the different types of internationalism. As we can see, we have two types of internationalism, which is the liberal internationalism and the socialist internationalism. And with that, we can say that the more appealing or the more favorable one is the liberal internationalism, because it's urge or it promotes cooperation within different countries to have an international relation system. So, after the Communist Information Bureau until the post-war period, ang parang ang nangyari na naging dominant pa rin itong liberal internationalism, because isa sa mga evidence kaya mas naging dominant pa rin yung liberal internationalism is rather or over the socialist internationalism, kasi may ebidensya at ang ebidensya niyan is yung pagkakaroon ng United Nations as the center of global governance. So, ang United Nations, as we can see, ito yung samahan ng mga iba't ibang bansa sa mundo upang magkaroon ng dito pag-uusapan yung kanilang mga disputes, mga problems, disagreements in a more peaceful way. So, after that, ito na yung pinakang huli kasi ito na yung pangkasalukuyan nangyari. We have the United Nations. So, in that sense, we can say that international relation cannot be achieved in a single unit of time. It encompasses a lot of time, a lot of efforts, a lot of patience para magkaroon ng talagang properly managed international relations system. So with that, I hope you clearly understand how international relations was um, international relation was produced, or kung paano ba na-develop yung international relation among countries. So, to conclude our discussion, this lesson examined the roots of international system, as if na tackle na natin yung roots. In tracing the roots, a short history of international was provided. Moreover, internationalism is but one window in the broader phenomena of globalization. Sabihin, mas maiintindihan natin ang globalization kung iintindihin muna natin yung internationalism, as it's a major part of globalization. Nevertheless, it's a very crucial aspect of globalization since global interactions are heightened by the increased interdependence among states or interdependence of state. So, ibig sabihin, mas maiintindihan natin itong globalization kung pag-aaralan or kung magkakaroon or kung aalamin mo kung bakit nagkaroon ng relationship ang bawat bansa sa mundo. Knowing the fact that we know that our world is more interdependence world. So, the increased interdependence manifests itself not just through state-to-state relations. Increasingly, international relations are also facilitated by international organizations that promote global norms and policies. And the most prominent example of this organization, of course, is the United Nations. So, through the United Nations, nagkaroon na ng global interstate system which is properly managed and properly facilitated. So with that, I am ending my video discussion on lesson 6, all about global interstate system. I hope you learned a lot from this topic, and I hope you should able to learn apply your knowledge in answering your learning activities. So, with that, I will share to you my reference. Dito ako kumukuha ng mga pinagsasabi ko, nilalagay ko sa aking presentation. So, with that, thank you very much, and let us meet again for our last lesson, which is the lesson 7, the global governance. Thank you!